I pledge allegiance to the flag
flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Here.
Mr. Lindemann?
Here.
Mr. Sabal?
Here.
Dr. Gomez?
Here.
Mr. Perrin?
Here, and I would, before we get into the business, I would like to just take a moment to recognize and acknowledge the passing of a longtime educator in the Douglas Unified Schools. The lady was a principal, the reading director, teacher, involved administratively for many years, Natalie Orozco. So I would like to just take a second to recognize her of silence. Thank you. An outstanding educator. Approval of the minutes, item 1D. Entertain a motion to approve
I move to approve the minutes.
by
I
Mr.
so
Lindemann.
move. I second.
Second by Mr. Sabal.
Yes.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Here.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Perrin?
Yes. Item 1E, summary of current events. Ms. Samaniego.
Yes, good morning, Mr. President, board members, and staff and members of the community. Just a few things. We just received information earlier this week that through the CARES Act, which is some funding that's going to be coming to school districts due to the coronavirus issue, we got notification that we will be able to get some funding out of the CARES Act. We do have to apply for it. The application is just opened up yesterday, so Mrs. Cox is working on it. And as soon as we get confirmation on the amount awarded, we'll be notifying the board. And just from the information that we received, there are no restrictions on what we can use that money for, because it's supposed to help us during these times, as we're probably going to need to make more expenses in order to make our schools safe. So that's coming down, and as soon as I have more information, I will let you know on the amount of money that will be awarded. So that's one thing. Yesterday, Arizona State Superintendent Kathy Hoffman did release the roadmap to reopening schools, and it was just issued yesterday. So we will be taking a good look at that as we get together our own task force to have a strategic plan in reopening our schools, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on at today's meeting. And Blue Cross Blue Shield, just who is our healthcare provider, just donated these cloth masks to us, and we got a little over 4,000 masks donated to us yesterday. And these are nice because they are the washable kind. And as I provide you information on the roadmap to schools opening, this will come into play. So just wanted to thank Blue Cross Blue Shield for their donation. We are also ordering, as companies are being able to provide us with some sanitizing material and wipes and hand gel and masks. It's tough. There's not many. There's companies. All school districts are fighting for these products, and so we found a company through Yolanda Caruso, and so we put it in order. Very limited order, but as soon as I think, Alma, did they say probably later on in June or July?
Before the end of the month.
Before the end of the month, they will get more supplies. And so obviously in reopening schools, we need to be able to provide everything that the CDC guidelines are recommending we have in order to keep everybody safe.
Mr. President,
Yes, Dr. Gomez.
you know that you can make a disinfectant with Clorox and water, right?
Clorox and water, and we heard Robert said aloe vera.
Well, I don't know about that, but I know that
Yeah.
the Clorox and water
Yes.
is good, and it's about a 10% solution. We
Okay.
used to use it all the time.
Okay, will do.
Okay, now, I don't want to cause a problem, but I think that was very generous of Blue Cross Blue Shield, but there's two issues there.
Okay.
Number one, it's a donation to the district. We have to actually act on it and approve it
Okay.
as a donation, because
Okay.
it's worth money, it's monetary. That's number one. Number two, it's got an advertisement on it. And so that adds another situation about advertising in the schools. So, again, I don't want to complicate the issue, and people will probably say, well, take it because it was given to you and you're in a crisis and it's something that you're going to need, and that's wonderful. But before we accept it,
Okay.
you need to put it on the board agenda for the board to accept it as a donation and what the value of them is.
Okay.
So to make sure you do that, then we're going to get into the part of the advertisement in the school. And I don't want to delve into that too deeply, but that's another issue. So, again, you don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth,
Yeah.
but we definitely want to do things right always, you know, and we've always purported to do things right.
Yeah, and these just came in yesterday.
Yesterday,
And so Nidia,
Are they blank on the other side?
yeah.
They're navy blue.
They're navy blue and they're blank on the other side. But they just came in yesterday, and I had not received any information from Ben that we would be getting these, so it was a surprise to me. But yeah, we'll put him on the agenda and then discuss on the,
Yeah, I don't think anybody would complain about it, and they say, well, why would, I'm sure smaller school districts or anybody else, I'm sure they're giving them to everybody, would say, well, why would you make an issue of it? But we do things right, okay? All right, reports by governing board members, you have any?
Yeah, Mr. President.
Mr. Lindeman?
I just wanted to, again, thank the administration for the drive-through graduation. I thought that went really well, and it was well accepted, and I think that was a very good gesture for us. And then I also wanted to thank the DUSD students for winning Best of Preps. I guess that's coming up. So congratulations to those guys. Thank you.
Okay, and then there was, when we get to your report, you're going, I hope you're going to be pretty thorough as to what the state of the state is regarding the finances and what the outlook is regarding school funding and those things that are associated with it when we get there, okay? All right, and if not, I'm sure that somebody will prompt you on some of the things that you need to say. Governing board members, anybody
No,
else?
nothing from me.
Okay, item F, business report.
Good morning, Mr. President, board members. This is the cash reports for the month of May. Again, we still have some balance. It's a little bit below of what we typically have, but it's still a good significant amount that I'm looking forward to carry over for next year on the M&O side of it. Any questions you have about that specific report?
No, go ahead.
We're working on, we're going to have that special board meeting on the 23rd, and where we're going to have the final revision to the budget, to this year's budget, and the proposed budget for next year. The new budget is going to reflect all of the increases that you guys authorized on the previous board meeting. Just with a reminder that next year is going to be a really tough year, especially because of the situations we're dealing with right now. The state is using most of the monies they have for the COVID situation and stuff. Luckily, unfortunately, the federal government is also cooperating with the CARE Act, like Mrs. Samaniego just mentioned. It's like an application process that there's going to be that we're working on already. We don't know the exact amount that we're going to receive. They have told us that there's not going to be a lot of restrictions on it for expenditures, so we can basically use it for whatever we want. But again, it's not recommended to use it for salaries, of course, because then we cannot sustain those kinds. When that money goes away, then everything goes away. So we're going to have to look deeply and see what will be the best in the best interest of the district to purchase. To actually help out with the recommendations that they're giving us on reopening the school by August. We're having a webinar today at 1 o'clock with ASBO and ASBA about the CARE Act and how to go about and do the application. So I'll be watching that and Ms. Cox will do that too, since she's going to be in charge of doing the application. And then we'll keep you posted. Of course, we're going to have that board meeting on the 23rd, where you're going to have a lot more detailed explanation on how that's going to work. Any questions?
So that the board thoroughly understands and gets somewhat of a forecast of what the funding is going to look like next year because of all of the situations that are involved. Not only with that very comprehensive report that was given yesterday, the path to reopening, that is going to cost a significant amount of money, the things that they're asking school districts to do. And board members need to be also aware, because if they get asked, and of course the community, that the forecast for monies next year, because of all of the variables that are involved with the reduction in what they might consider loss of enrollment, and people opting not to send their kids to school, or homeschooling them, or them going someplace else, that the percentage by the Joint Legislative Budget Committee right now is that they're looking at something like an 18%, I think it's drop in enrollment in various school districts. So if you can imagine how difficult it's going to be for the administration to open school this year, not only thinking about how we're going to accommodate these very, very rigid guidelines that are being set forth, but how we're going to finance it, because, and it's not this year, we're not concerned about this year, but it'll be next year.
Next year.
Because right now, there's going to be a huge fluctuation predicted in the enrollment, which means money, all right? And that's just vaguely. And then, of course, there's other issues, and I know that Angel's going to address it later, but the AIA has also come up with some guidelines that are going to be extremely rigid, and the administration is going to have to make some very difficult decisions as to how they're going to proceed, given what they know within those guidelines. So I wanted to say that, and I didn't want to preempt you, but I think it's important that the board know that the finances for next year are going to be
Correct.
very, very shaky. So anything we do monetarily, and it also in conjunction with the care funds that they're talking about, we're going to really need that money. So we should put that money aside for right now and not make any decisions regarding that money at all, because if we decide that we're going to open up in a normal way, normal within the normal situation as it is now, it's going to be a significant cost to the school district to do that. And then, of course, it's going to be significant in athletics as well. If you looked at the AIA guidelines, that's significant, the things that they're asking you to do in order to even start any type of an activity. So I just want the board to be aware that it's extremely important. All right, with that, do you want to add anything financially to that?
No,
Mr.
again, yeah, I mean, very well said. I mean, we're going to be very conservative in our expenditures next year. Again, typically our budget is still 85% salaries and benefits. There's not a lot of room for any other kind of expenditures, but everything is going to be very detailed looked at, all of the expenditures, so whatever is needed and not needed. So that's a conversation that I'm going to have pretty soon with the principals anyways when I distribute the budgets. Also, I would just want to reiterate that these recommendations from the state or from Superintendent Hoffman, these are just recommendations. It's going to be for every individual school district boards to make decisions on what to do and not to do. These are just what they're recommending, and of course, money is an issue. But like Mr. Brain is saying, yeah, those funds are going to be there available, that in case that we decide to do what we want to do.
Well, keep in mind that the care monies are as a direct result of the virus. I mean,
Correct.
direct, so that school districts can, because of all of
Function into whatever's
this
needed.
increase in overcost,
Yep.
in overhead. All right, so.
Mr. Brain?
Yes, question?
Because you're talking about enrollment and maybe a drop in our enrollment and stuff like that. I think one of the things that we have to do so we can be proactive about this is to find data I don't know where you would get it, but maybe for the county health department or the state health department, to see how many cases they have in this, from K to 12th grade, you know, and see what the incidence is and stuff like that. If the incidence is lower than it is, then we have to get that out to the people so that they're not afraid
Of sending
to
the
send
kids.
their kids to school, okay? So we need to be proactive in that sense.
Yes, and that's part of my plan, because I will be in contact with local health officials and our county health department. Because we know that just yesterday, as a matter of fact, we got notification from city officials here that from Friday to yesterday, there was a spike in cases in Cochise County. So what they did, it was from 64, it was at 64 around there on Friday, and it went up to 82. And so the changes coming for Cochise County are that surgeries are now being canceled again, and not the, most necessary surgeries, and anything with endoscopy, colonoscopy, all those things are being canceled again until Cochise County has a decrease for 14 days again. So we will be getting all of that data as
Yeah.
we're working on our strategic plan.
Mr. President, just one comment. See, and I think that's the fallacy in the reporting, because they say, okay, Cochise County had this amount. I don't know that I have seen any information coming out that says Douglas has this many people that have tested positive or that have the virus. Sierra Vista has this many. Wilcox has this many. Benson has this many. Alfreda has this many. We don't know. And even deaths. Where have the deaths occurred? And that's, I think, very important information that I wish that the county health department would provide.
release,
Yes. I'm sorry.
Okay, is that it, Doctor?
That's it.
Okay, who's gonna do the enrollment?
I will.
Okay, go ahead.
And speaking about enrollment, we are right now currently enrolled at 4,189 students. So our enrollment is showing positive, right? But the concern is, once we reopen schools, in the event that we can, then if parents are going to say, you know what, I'm going to keep my kids, or I'm not going to keep my kids at home. So that's where we're at as of today.
Yeah, and I think a state survey showed that there was a huge percentage of parents statewide that said that they weren't going to send their kids to school. And with the enrollment, of course, it directly reflects on the new student center. And I know, and I hope Mene, and I know in Mene she's right on top of everything, and I know you in conjunction with her, but the reporting is also going to change, because there's going to be certain guidelines regarding certain gaps of attendance and time periods before and after attendance. So the school year as we know it traditionally is not going to be
The same.
what we're going to see in the future, because things are going to change drastically in education, especially as we know it in the day-to-day classroom instruction, because once you guys get a chance, if you're interested in looking at those guidelines, and they're only guidelines, but the things that are being recommended to do in the classroom, these teachers are going to earn their money. And it's a shame, to be honest with you. There's so much that's going to be asked of them that you would think that we're going to be more medically concerned, and we should be, about the welfare of our students than actually the subject matter and what we're trying to promulgate in the classroom. So,
Yeah, Mr. President.
anyway, go ahead, Mr. Lindler.
I just had to comment alongside of that, that we need to involve the teachers in all of these decisions, and of course, give them as much help as we can when we're trying to social distance and all that stuff. So I just want to make sure that
Yes,
we're including them.
and part of my task force will have teacher representatives from every school that will start working on it this week.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's a major section in the guidelines on.
Teachers.
On that part for teachers and their hygiene and all those things. So anyway, all right, any further discussion regarding any of the reports? So we'll move to item 2A, approval of the following consent agenda items, payroll and expense voucher 1, 2, and 3. Entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
I'm second.
Second by Mr. Sabal. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, no,
Dr. Gomez?
sorry, yes.
Mr. Bahrain?
Yes. Again, it's great to see these people here, and hopefully it's going to expedite the meeting now so that we don't have to worry about who's on first and all those things. All right, item 3A, discussion action on the approval of certified hires. Ms. Samaniego.
Yes, as presented, these are 4 teachers that are filling vacancies, and two of these were currently, this past semester, doing their student teaching here with us, so I'm very proud that we had the ability to hire our own student teachers that are currently Douglas, residents and moving into teaching, so as presented.
How are you doing with vacancies and hires?
We still have some at Douglas High School, a couple here and there, but not too many. I'm not too concerned, but we're going to keep recruiting and doing the best that we can in the near future.
Very good. Entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve the
By
certified hires.
By Mr. Lindemann. Is there a second?
Second.
By Mr. Sabal. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bahrain?
Yes. Item B, discussion action on the approval of classified hires.
And these are, as presented, these are already current employees working for a food service department, but if you remember, we extended our food service summer program, so these employees needed to be presented so that they could work, and they already started at the beginning of June.
In that they're funded out of the
510,
Food service,
the food
510.
service.
food service. Entertain a motion to
I
approve.
move to approve the classified hires.
By Mr. Lindemann.
Second.
Second by Mr. Sabal. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bahrain?
Yes. Item 3C, discussion action on the approval of certified resignation. Ms.
Yes, as presented, Amanda Greer is a longtime teacher of Douglas, but she'll be moving out of town, so therefore is having to submit her resignation.
And that's effective?
Yeah, at the start of next school year. Yeah, she finished her contract for this year.
Oh, so she's going to work one more year.
No, she's done at the end of, well, at the end of, right now, her last day of work was 5,
Oh, I
like
see. Oh,
24.
I thought
So
I
she
read
will not
21.
be returning.
Okay.
Well, let's clarify that. Just for the sake of accuracy, it says resignation
Yes.
effective 5/21.
So she said, yes, well, that was the
May
last day,
21st, 2020.
yeah, that was the last day of work.
May
5/20,
21st, 2020.
yeah, 5/21 was the last day of work for
Okay.
teachers, yes.
Okay. Any discussion? Motion, Mr.
Move to
Lindemann.
approve.
By Mr. Lindemann, second.
Second.
By Mr. Sabal. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bahrain?
Yes. Item D, discussion action on the approval of classified resignation and retirement. Ms. Sumner.
As presented, so our mechanic, longtime mechanic, Antonio Peralta, is going to be retiring at the, well, in a couple of days. What's today?
Yeah.
Today?
In a month.
In July the
July.
3rd. So that's, and then an instructional aide.
Okay, entertain a motion to approve
I move to approve.
by Mr. Lindemann.
Second.
Second by Mr. Sabal. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bahrain?
Yes. Item E, discussion action on the approval of classified transfers. Ms. Sumner.
As presented, and some of them, and on your agenda, you see that there is a change in pay, and so these are just either an IA moving into, from an ESS to a health aid specialist. So they're moving in positions and therefore needed a salary change.
Those are going to be salary changes with those?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
By Mr. Lindeman,
So move. Second.
by Mr. Sabal. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Berrien?
Yes. Item F,
The following is just for information purposes and no change in pay. These are just internal transfers, and what we've been doing up until this point is that anytime we have an internal transfer, let's say an IA from Ferris moves over to be an IA at Clausen, we do all that internally, but per our general auditor finding, this is one issue that came about, and normally these transfers don't ever make it to an agenda because there is no change in pay. It's just a position or school change. So in order to be more clear and consistent, this way it's on the agenda, it stays on this document, we can always review the minutes, and it's easier for our internal protocols that take place from changing of email accounts to another school, deleting accounts from one school to the next. We thought it was best to put it here. So it's just for informational purposes for these certified and classified transfers.
entertain a motion to approve both.
Do we need a motion if it's just discussion?
It's just a.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. It was just discussion.
Yes,
Information
Yes,
only.
I
Very
have a little
good.
discussion.
Yeah, okay. Item G, discussion update on AIA rule.
Dr. Ed has some discussion
Oh,
on
I'm
that
sorry,
agenda.
Dr. Ed.
Yeah, okay. This is just for my information,
Uh-huh.
okay? On Maria Sexton, wasn't she the librarian?
Yes, but she already worked on her ESS certification, and so she, if you recall, well, she was a transfer that we had not too long ago, and
okay.
she wants to now go back to Douglas High School
Well, no,
as
that's
the
fine.
ESS
That-
teacher.
That's fine, okay, but. so
She was a
Do you
li-
have a librarian?
We have a library aide, which is an instructional aide, and Douglas High School felt that really a teacher is not needed. They're a certified teacher, so we have an aide there to run the library.
Okay.
Well, wait a minute. You do have certified librarians. I mean, they have a certified endorsement for a librarian. Can you, with all the regulations with North Central and with the State Department, run a library with an instructional aide?
And I'm not going to answer yes to all of those, but like North Central, yes. And when they moved Mrs. Sexton into an ESS position, that was a conversation because now with IAs, and I'm not just talking about Douglas High School, but in the past, IAs couldn't stay and run, for example, a library or a classroom. Those guidelines have changed. And but with the like state and all of that, Douglas High School felt and said that they didn't, and they worked with Mr. Nunez on this, that they didn't need a certified library at Douglas High School. But I can double check and make sure that for next year they won't need one, or they will.
You know, I think libraries and those other subjects that are similar, I think they get lost in the shuffle sometimes, but I don't know about the rest of the board, but to me, a librarian is an essential part of the learning process, especially if that's a center and a resource of learning. Librarians are extremely resourceful. And anyway, let's just wait till you
Okay.
find out
Okay.
what you want to do. We don't need to get into that discussion, but just make sure that you're okay
Okay.
with the state. But as a resource, a librarian is a very, very important person in my perception. Okay, so you need a motion on that?
No.
No, it was just for informational purposes.
Information, all
Yes.
right. All right,
G.
that's right, Dr. Gomez. G, A discussion update on AIA rules and regulations regarding DHS athletics. Who's going to do that?
And I have Mr. Angel Ortega, Athletic Director, and he's going to be talking about, one is obviously updating us on AIA rules, regulations regarding athletics and being able to start athletics back up after COVID-19, and he's got, lots of information to share. So, Mr. Ortega?
Yes, so, Mrs. Samaniego, good morning. Mr. Soto, Mr. Bahrain, members of the board. So as the state of Arizona began to gradually start their reopening phases, as well as many other institutions, schools, other entities, the discussion of the reopening of interscholastic athletics began to swirl around as, many people around the state were asking what that would look like and how it would begin and what would be the steps to be able to reopen athletics, interscholastic athletics properly with the correct guidelines in place. So about a month and a half ago, I began to assemble what I would think of would be some kind of a reopening task force. And it included myself, our certified athletic trainer, Mitch Nelson, as well as our PE coach and PE and health coach, Hunter Long, with his background in public health as well. The discussions began of what it might look like, what obstacles we might run into during this process. Quite honestly, I thought that we were going to have to develop our own guidelines and plans from scratch. Fortunately for us, sometime in May, about 3 weeks ago, Mr. Nelson shared with myself and Mr. Long guidance from NFHS, which is National Federation of High Schools, mainly focusing on athletics. NFHS, as well as Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, which is SMAC, developed national guidelines for reopening athletics, interscholastic athletics. During that time, we looked at the 3 phases, the phased approach, the guidelines that they provided, as well as frequently asked questions, items to consider. It goes well into detail, and I provided that for you in your folder as well behind the AIA, and I'll get to that in a second. We met about a week after as Southern Arizona Athletic Directors. We meet monthly, this time through Zoom. It was known then that the AIA would eventually be releasing their guidelines as well, which were going to be based off of those that came from NFHS, as well as some adjustments or any kind of accommodations that would come specifically for the state of Arizona. On Thursday of last week, AIA officially released their guidelines, their recommended guidelines for returning to athletic activity, which again came from NFHS, SMAC, and as well as the Trust, which also works with AIA. This was approved through the Board of Advisors for AIA and was sent to all of the athletic directors as well as coaches over the weekend. Having said that, we started to look with Mr. Nelson as well as Coach Long and myself. We looked over the weekend, and I began to research what other schools similar to us or in other areas that released their guidelines to kind of see what works for us and how we can tailor it to fit Douglas High School and Douglas Unified. We used ideas from our Fria Union High School District, where their athletic director shared their guidelines with athletic directors across the state, as well as Paradise Honors, where that was found off of their website and social media platforms. So fortunately, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. We used what we saw fit for us, as well as add things that we felt were necessary for our athletes at Douglas High School. During that time, we looked at a four-phase approach rather than a 3-phase to slow down our gradual reopening a little bit more and to be real cognizant about what's being taking place during those phases. So I provided to you on the left side what would be our 4-phase approach, which came from Paradise Honors High School in the Phoenix area. as well as a detailed outline as to what Phase 1 would look like at Douglas High School. And things that include what would the environment look like, stay healthy procedures, weight room procedures and guidelines, the use of balls, athletic training, the athletic training room, and other bits of information there at the end. What else was recommended by AIA was the use of a waiver for participation during any kind of summer workout or practices for athletics. We were provided a waiver example which had to do with graduation from the trust, but I reworded some of the graduation words to athletic summer workouts, which right now is in the process of getting approved by our district's attorney, and then making sure that the word and everything is okay. As well as the back of your folder would be a coach and athlete monitoring form, which checks for symptoms, and I'll get to that in a bit. So this, according to AIA, with these guidelines in place, some schools around the Arizona area, or specifically Phoenix metro area, have already begun their phased approach, even as early as last Tuesday, May 26th. Some more began their phased opening approach yesterday, June 1st. I felt, in my opinion, that it would be best that we wait 2 more weeks and tentatively begin our phased approach on June 15th of 2020. Reason being was that these 2 weeks will allow us the opportunity to meet with our coaches, meet with school and district administration, discuss the guidelines with our task force, including our certified athletic trainer, who has also reached out to health officials in areas with similar demographics as us, and even include student input, where I meet virtually with our next group of student leaders and seeing what their thoughts are onto a phased opening approach, and it was quite interesting to see some of those responses where they were very consistent with what AIA has presented as anyway. So I'm proud of those students to provide that input, which is things that we would follow as an athletics department as well. So specifically, what we're looking at today was the idea of what has been happening for the past 4 or 5 years is our peak performance program, which takes place in the summer. This year we did have a plan, and we had met as early as April to discuss what that would look like under any kind of guidelines. Obviously, it wouldn't be the same as years past. So we discussed those ideas, and as now that the guidelines have been released, we talked about it as a group, and now that we involved the coaches yesterday talking about these guidelines, we felt that at this time, logistically, that program, which could involve as many as 100 to 200 kids at a time, just wouldn't satisfy these guidelines appropriately. We wouldn't be able to follow them, or it would be difficult to follow them at this time. Even having the idea of separating a large group of 50 into 5 pods of 10 students, just logistically thinking how those students would be able, how would they arrive with a temperature check and symptom checks? What would the lines look like? How would they get grouped? How would they go from one place to another? As well as how would they depart from that program? Would they all go at once? Would we have to start? So logistically looking at it, as we discussed yesterday, we decided that the PPT program just wouldn't work under these guidelines. So we decided that we would leave it to the individual programs themselves to implement some kind of a summer program, whether they choose to implement those programs virtually, as they have been with the school closures, or have the opportunity beginning tentatively June 15th to begin to incorporate small workouts in person, however, following our guidelines that were set by our school, AIA, and FHS, and with the guidance of our athletic trainer, who has been heavily involved in the development of this entire process. So as we met yesterday as coaches, we decided that each program would develop their own phased opening approach as well, using our school's guidelines as their resource. So we have set it's kind of like homework to our coaches to give them a week to develop their phased outline approach of how they would return come June 15th. Again, some might be continue those virtual workouts because each sport varies, where one sport might have a heavy amount of contact, such as football or wrestling or spirit line, where they might even start slower than usual, as opposed to those that might continue or that might meet in person, where those are our long distance runners, or a different approach would be utilizing the weight room in groups of 9, including the coach, which would be 10. But there is plans in place, and coaches are now working on developing their specific sport opening process. So we left our meeting yesterday feeling good about it. We were able to address concerns, talk about the details of what that would look like, and then we will reconvene sometime next week to go over some of those details, such as training our coaches how to use the no-touch thermometer and how to incorporate the symptom check, which AIA provides for us. Mr. Nelson, who would be available for questions if needed right now, has developed a Google form where instead of by paper on hand that they provided us to do something a little bit digitally, and the reason being is we're able to gather data and look at our data over a period of time, because each phase will be determined on that data. We will not move from one phase to another without having looked at that and making sure that we are all comfortable moving into the next phase. So again, utilizing technology where the coaches have that available at the palm of their hands on their phone, we're able to pull that data and determine what's best for our students and our coaches moving forward. Should the phase 1 be 2 weeks? Should it be 3 or more? It'll all be based off of the data that we collect during those 2 weeks. So again, this was it was very carefully put together, which is why we didn't jump into athletics today, which could be very possible by other schools, but we decided to take our time and really determine what's the best possible scenario for our athletes and making sure that our students are safe as well as our coaches.
Well, first of all, that was a very good report and very thorough. Before the board gets into any discussion, I want to get the reaction from Ms. Samaniego.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ortega. I've been meeting myself with Mr. Ortega and discussing our athletics program over the last month or so. And so when I met with him last week, I believe we sat down, and so I did send information up to Candy, which is specifically the waiver that students would have to fill out and be signed by the student and the parent in order to participate in anything. So what I want to point today before you all start discussing is under phase 1, their proposed starting date would be June 15th. And so you heard Mr. Ortega saying that after reconsidering the guidelines and how PPT would actually function under those guidelines, they've made a decision not to have PPT this summer, which is a reason why I'll have to pull some agenda items from the next item. And I think that was the best decision that we could have made, knowing that they wouldn't have been able to meet all the guidelines under the PPT program. However, the other part is that under the June 15th starting date under phase 1 would allow the coaches themselves to start some kind of initial athletics program for their individual sport, because all of our coaches do some type of summer practice, gathering of the students in order to prepare for their own sports. So you have football. I don't know how much wrestling does over the summer, but baseball. So under that phase 1, what he's saying is that the coaches have a week to each kind of look at these guidelines provided by Mr. Ortega to be able to do something under phase 1. Okay, so while PPT won't be happening, I need you to understand that what he's proposing is under these guidelines that athletics be allowed to start kind of practicing under phase 1, okay? And under phase 1, it says no contact, distance of 6 feet or more, no close contact drills, no more than 10 participants per coach per group, staggered grouping if more than 10 athletes per team, no sharing of water bottles, no passing handling of balls between athletes, group equipment disinfected between participants, hand washing, disinfecting required, and weight room limit of no more than 10 individuals. So that's what the phase 1 guidelines are. And what he's saying is if they will reassess, if they feel that phase 1 needs to continue for 3 weeks as opposed to 2 weeks, then they're going to look at their data and move on to, before they move on to phase 2. And then obviously phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 has their different pieces of information. Mr. Ortega, while you're not recommending to move on with PPT, are you recommending that the weight room be accessible and available during the summer?
Yes, so there is a reason why 2 individuals' names will not be removed, and that's because our weight room, with approval, will still be open beginning June 15th, and it would be a lot more structured than previous years, as in the past, weight room was open for a 2-hour block period and open for any students or DUSD staff members as well. This year, Hunter Long, who is our weight room manager throughout the summer, is now developing a process for disinfecting equipment before and after workouts, as well as the scheduling of not just individual athletes, but by team. So coaches would coordinate with Coach Long to set up their scheduled times, so that way we know exactly who is in the weight room and at what time, and they still have to follow those guidelines as well, including the thermometer check as well as the symptom screening. So there is tasks for Coach Long, as he is also going to be developing that process as far as how things will be sanitized. He's going to educate the athletes on how to properly sanitize equipment, from barbells to dumbbells to just anything around them that's being used. So he is being utilized during that summer and will be in charge of handling the schedule and the use of those the equipment inside. The others was Mr. Mitch Nelson, who is our athletic trainer during the summer. Although there won't be any PPT, there will still be athletics that will be occurring during the summer. So his duties would be to have that open office time at his office at the high school, to have himself available by appointment only, because according to guidelines, it can only be 1 athlete at a time. So it would be also a structured program to where coaches would set up those times with Mr. Nelson, so he's able to do any kind of visits or any kind of evaluation on those athletes during the summer. That way he's available, because again, with athletics comes the potential or the potential of injuries. So we do need to make sure that he is available during that time. And if there is time where he might not have athletes, he will make himself available at practices and things like that moving forward, because there will be practices taking place. So when there is athletics, we do need an athletic trainer available as much as possible.
When are you done?
Yes.
When will the waivers be available?
Candy, I just spoke to Candy yesterday, and so she was just going to run it by another attorney who specializes in athletics. So I would say by the end of the week, I'd have her approval. And like I said, that waiver, Mr. Bahrain, was put together by the trust. So that waiver was, or he took it and changed the wording of it to fit athletics, but it was the graduation waiver that the trust has already provided for us in case that we're able to have a graduation ceremony. And that waiver was sent to all school districts that work with the trust. And so it's already been reviewed by their attorneys.
Is it basically going to be a hold harmless waiver for the
It's right
district?
there, yes.
It's part of your folder.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's a sample, and it says sample across because it isn't approved or anything yet, but it is just it's a waiver release and assumption of risk form, and it's very similar to other waivers that I've already seen from other school districts. The wording in there is the same.
I won't read it all, but the very last piece, it says, I further agree not to make a claim against or sue the release parties arising out of my or my child's participation in these activities. I have read this agreement and understand that it relates to surrendering and releasing valuable legal rights. I do so freely and voluntarily. So again, this was totally done by the trust attorneys, and Angel changed the wording to fit the needs of athletics, but I'm still having Candy review it.
Okay. And then the other component is, Are they going to be required to wear masks?
So that's another thing that was asked by coaches yesterday, and at least during the first couple of phases, we are going to require that they are using a mask, just depending on the type of activity, because if there's any kind of high aerobic exercises that could cause any kind of, we wouldn't require. But things like weight room where they're not lifting at high maximal levels, so they would be able to use a mask. But yes, we are going to be requiring them.
And where are you going to get the masks?
Now, at that point, we don't have the the answer for that as far as would we be able to require it as an athletic or require that as an athletic department yet, but that could be something we talk about down the road.
Well, I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I personally believe that, if the district is going to do this, and I think we should move along carefully, especially all the due diligence that you've shown in putting this together and all the people you've involved. I don't know how the board feels about the mask. I personally strongly believe in it, and I would want to make sure that everybody understands that if this board does that we've taken every precaution available to us. So I don't know, board members, the cost of a mask would be insignificant for the value of it. But then again, do you have those kind of monies in your athletic department to provide masks for everybody that's a participant in the program?
It's possible. We would have to take a look at it. It'd be something that we'd have to, but.
Board members, would you want them to wear a mask?
Oh, definitely.
Well, we're not wearing one right now, but I think in some cases, if there's social distancing, maybe the mask is not used. Maybe a guy is working at a station lifting weights, and everybody else is 6 feet away. Maybe he doesn't have to. But I think once they're finished with that, and then they start interacting, then yes, they need a mask.
Okay.
Did Mr. Lindman?
I'm wearing a mask,
Yeah.
and I think that they need to, because if you're lifting and you're breathing heavily,
Yeah.
and so there's the thing, and I don't want to get caught in a negligence type of thing, because if we say you don't have to, or
Kids won't wear it.
it could be a negligence factor.
And-
I'm uncomfortable with this because TUSD, I read, has already canceled their plans for the outdoor graduation, and so that means that things aren't settled yet. And so I'm thinking, I have been in the weight room for many years, but it certainly hasn't gotten any bigger. And I don't know if you can put 5 kids in there and have social distancing and stuff like that. So I'm kind of concerned about this. And then the other question is, if we have our fast start in July, how is this going to overlap? And then how is that going to affect when you get one kids want to run out there, and then, you got to be over here? I just don't know about it.
Mr. Ortega, as far as the weight room is concerned, it's the size of it, I don't know the exact size of it, but just from your experience, and let's say, because it says here limited to no more than 10 athletes, and so that would be 9 athletes and the coach, or even Mr. Nelson, if you need to chime in. The facility of our weight room, and having 10 individuals in there and keep social distancing, is that feasible with the size of our weight room?
Good morning, Board. The size of our weight room right now has 5 what we call power stations. And they are roughly from middle of the station to middle of station, probably 10 to 12 feet apart. And so if you essentially put one person at each of those stations, you're social distancing at least 10 feet. And then you have the extra area, which would probably be the size of from here, so you could fit 1 to 2 to 3 possibly people in there, depending on what kind of exercise you're doing. And then you have the secondary room, which could fit 2 to 3 more people, depending on what exercises you're doing. So I think the size of weight room could accommodate
10
the 9 to 10 people
at a time.
at a time, right, to answer your question.
First of all, let the record show that that's Mitch Nelson. He's a trainer at the high school, just for the record. Yes, did, who
Mr.
was that?
Sabah.
Mr.
Yeah,
Sabal.
I would think masks would be essential, and they should be using them.
Okay, thank you for that. With Mitch, with your extensive background and your knowledge, you're key to this whole thing. Do you see that there would be any complications or any situations that might come up that you might think that that we haven't covered it? Not meaning us, but I mean you, that you'd be able to on the spot be able to address it so that we wouldn't be compromising or getting into a situation where we're exposing students to something that we certainly none of us want to happen. So could you just comment on that, knowing what you know about weight rooms and your weight, your own
Knowledge on trainers.
sports medicine
and-
training area? Is this going to be feasible?
That's something that Mr. Ortega and I have been talking about extensively since day one, I think maybe even March, and is that when these guidelines first come out, the question is about athletics and whether or not you pod the athletes or you use indoor or outdoor. The question is, can we follow the guidelines to a T, dot our I's, cross our T's, and not have any problem? Well, that comes down to protective barriers. That comes down to all of our infectious disease policies. So how do we clean? What do we clean with? When do we clean? Who's cleaning? Who's accountable for that? Who's responsible for that? And if we don't have hand sanitizer, if we don't have our cleaning products, our disinfectant products available, well, then there's no way to clean, which means there's no way to utilize the weight room. And so the question becomes then, I ask Mr. Ortega all the time, what's our supply for that? Because we have all these different other schools and different things that are going on, and so that becomes the question: is do we have that stuff? And if we do have that stuff, then I think it's feasible to do our due diligence and clean. I mean, when you look at medical clinics and things like that, they're open, they're available, but they're cleaning. And they're doing all the things that's necessary in following their guidelines. So if we can follow our guidelines and do all that, I think it's feasible. I think it's possible. I think we do all due diligence. That's just my opinion, and from my professional opinion, as long as you're following the guidelines to a T, I think it's feasible, possible. Now, are you running the risk of infection and things like that? I think we're running it right now. Anywhere you go to Walmart, you're running the risk. And so the risk benefit, I was talking to the coaches yesterday, and I don't want to get too long-winded, but there's a lot of layers to pull off. In conversations with other doctors around Cochise County, there's a lot of layers to pull off on allowing athletics and allowing other things to go. You talk about distancing, you talk about masks, you talk about cleaning, you talk about, there's a lot of things to talk about. We could go down a rabbit hole and get stuck there all day. We talk about equipment, you talk about things like that. There's a lot of things to talk about, but if we do our due diligence and follow the guidelines, I think it's possible. And I think you're decreasing the risk of transmission.
Who is going to be in charge of compliance to oversee that one very vital aspect of this whole situation? In other words, who's going to be the one that's going to monitor and go on and say, hey, is it going to be up? The other question comes in, is this orientation for coaches on or whoever's going to be involved in the activity? I mean, are you going to get them together and you're going to go through all of this with them thoroughly so that they understand what all of the ramifications are of why they're doing it and how it needs to be done? And I'll just hitchhike on that orientation, and you should, I think you do anyway, Angel, but you have orientation for all your coaches, especially the ones that are non-certified, the volunteers. You always go through what the rules and regulations, what the contact with the students, all those kinds of things are. You do that extensively, right? In all sports, right?
So are you referring to this year and what we're planning? Or
I'm just speaking overall on orientation, especially
yeah,
now.
so that, I mean, we do meet at the beginning of each school year, which, you know, we meet at the beginning of July, as I did with my coaches almost a year ago. So we do. They do. They're provided their handbook for the school year. They sign off on it, and we do go over some of those concerns or those items or things that may have been changed or things that might have been updated. So to answer your question, yes.
But does somebody, and this is important because the school district's in a lawsuit right now. And one of the first questions that always comes up in the lawsuit is, was the person certified to do it? Were they aware of the rules and regulations? And did they follow policy? And so that meshes very well right now with this conversation, because if you're going to do this and your coaches are going to be involved in it, are they going to be told and you're going to go through all of this stuff with them?
So everything that's in your folder was discussed yesterday. So the next step in our process would be meeting with those same coaches again next week at some point, and now dive into those details, the detail aspect of it, as far as what the pre-practice would look like. Having Mr. Long talk about the safety procedures in the weight room, sanitizing of the equipment. So yes, they will be trained on those, and they'll have more knowledge, which is why we gave this 2 weeks to not start on June 1st, but start on June 5th, so we can iron out those items as well.
But who is going to be directly in charge of compliance in that area? Would it be Mitch?
Well, it'd be myself. It'd be me as the athletic director, I would say, because just as we expect our teachers to be professionals and follow their duties, same idea with coaches. We give them those expectations, and we just we're there as their, I'm there as the athletic director, the assistants, the resource for them, and to make sure that they're held accountable for it.
Okay, but I was thinking more specifically about the hygiene part, and
Sure.
and so you work that out, and you're
Right.
perfectly capable of doing that.
But you-
All right, members of the board,
You brought up a good question.
Mr. President,
go ahead, Mr. Ramos. Go ahead.
yes, I got a little bit of clarification just on the mask. Is the athletic department going to furnish masks to the athletes, or the athletes going to be responsible for the masks if they're going to be worn?
Mr. Ramos, let me clarify your question, see if we understood. Are you asking if the athletes would be responsible for bringing their own mask, or would we provide it for them? Is that what you asked?
That's correct.
Okay. And that is a question in every guideline, and I'm sure, Angel, you found this to be true on the AIA guidelines, as I did on the reopening of schools, that there is no information or no indication that says the school district must provide the mask. It just says recommended. So where you make the expectation on the parents or the students or the athletes that they bring it with them, or that the district provides the mask. So there is no indication anywhere that I found that says you must provide it as an entity. So with that being said, Angel's concern, and we met briefly again before this meeting, his concern is, one, do we have enough supplies, to be able to sanitize the weight room on a daily basis, and on a daily basis, not just meeting once. It's going to be, if the weight room is still open, 2 hours a day? Then it's going to be, if I have one group for 30 minutes and another group for 30 minutes and so forth, then I'm sanitizing 3 times. The masks, we did place an order in, and Alma, are they in yet? No, they're not in. We placed a district order, and for the district, meaning that I am ordering for all departments and all schools. And so the first supply should be coming in. I'm not sure if it's going to come in by the 18th, but some of the items that we ordered, Alma, are
Mask, gloves, sanitizer, spray. That was basically gloves and sanitizer,
Okay.
PPE equipment.
And so that order, we worked with Yolanda Caruso, head nurse, as she's working directly with this company. And this company will be supplying us, but this is all they had available. I mean, they didn't have 4,000 masks or 4,000 cases of sanitizer, but it's what they had at the moment. So we don't know when those items are going to be coming in. The other issue we run into in ordering is that with procurement rules, anything we order has to be delivered to us by June 30th for this school year. And so business office, in order to start closing the books and POs and all of that, we have some deadline dates of ordering for the sake of making sure that we have our items in by June 30th. And at this point, ordering, for
Anything, it's
anything is closed.
Correct, not until July 1st. Again, just reiterating that June 30th, if we don't get any of that, we have to return it.
If we
to
don't,
the
yeah,
vendor.
if we don't get it by June 30th, then we, either we return those items, or, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Soto, but if the company says, yeah, we guarantee that we're gonna deliver, and then that they don't by June 30th, is there something that we don't have to pay the PO because they
Well,
didn't
of course, that's why we have to return the items, and then we're not gonna pay them. We have the
Okay,
PO.
but we have to return them.
Correct.
And so, with thermometers, I had already placed an order, and so we have, I think I had ordered 2 per school. So we have those that haven't been used that I told Angel we could allow you to use them, and then, once your or your summer weight program or whatever is needed, we return them while he orders more thermometers, because obviously that's a thing we're gonna be having to order. So with sanitizing, I don't know what you have, as far as athletics is concerned right now. I think you'd have to go back and kind of look at, with your custodian of athletics, or even with DHS, and what do we have available? And like what Dr. Ed said, the combination of the Clorox with the waters too, because I think some of our schools, have been, doing that too, and just putting them in spray bottles to disinfect. So I'm not too concerned with that portion, but it'd be like if you need the hand sanitizer for the students to have, and will you have the sinks available to wash their hands? I know that some places are even saying, like you can't utilize the bathrooms because then you have people going in, and then who's disinfecting and all of that. So that would be, I think, Mr. Ortega's only concern, but knowing that we would have these things and expecting the kids to come in with their own masks. Like I said, we have these, but we'd have to get them board approved, and then there's the thing of the label. But we have these, we have masks available that we can easily say, okay, those can be issued once, we board approve them, or have a special meeting to at least get those approved. So we'd have that, and then the sanitizing, I think we could handle that with what we have. It just would be this, that I'm not sure if you have enough of it, or if we have other departments or other schools that could share, at least for now.
Well, 2 quick things. Regarding the masks, it's a voluntary activity,
Right.
and it's extracurricular.
Right.
You could make it incumbent on them to bring their own masks. Just say that, just have them bring the mask. Now, the other thing that's worrisome is that you're talking about the supplies. We're going to need that supplies. We don't want to do it at the expense of the classroom, and that stuff's expensive. And if we would be remiss if we did something and expended an abundance of it on this program, and then school starts and we run short. I'm not saying that it's not important, but it's a consideration. So you want to make sure that you coordinate everything with him, and as Mitch said, we definitely want to. That's paramount. You got to do that. It's something that's going to have to be done. So those are the things that I think you need to work out with the administration, keeping all those things in mind. And I don't know, but Dr. Gomez had a comment that he wanted.
Well, I just had one question, and this had to do with the waiver. Was the waiver just something that came up now because of this COVID-19, or had you always had a waiver?
No, this is specifically.
Yes, because of the situation, yeah.
So in other words, if my son participated I don't have a son, but anyway, let's say my grandson
Uh-huh.
participated in football at the high school. I never had to sign a waiver before.
Right, so
Yeah.
we also need to keep in mind that all of this is in just regards for summer workouts and athletic activities for the summer. AIA will come up with any kind of guidance or anything for the fall when that time comes.
But AIA does have I mean, you do have the
Yes,
athletes
yes,
sign and
so-
parents sign that when they participate in athletics, there may be injury, there may be,
Right.
something that happens, and they're not holding, they do sign that.
Right.
That is already in place.
Yeah.
Okay,
For every sport.
so then you just added
Yes.
more to that.
Yeah,
Correct.
this one is very specific, that was done by the trust for any graduation activities due to COVID-19. What Angel just did is change the wording to athletics, which is why Candy is reviewing it, to make sure if this is good to go.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions or comments regarding the report by board members?
I was just going to ask again, Mr. President, we haven't had the fast start yet, so is this going to?
And I will,
Lapse through, or-
no, and I have very detailed information about that, so I'm not concerned
No.
that this will affect it or impede or too many kids.
Okay,
Mr.
how,
Gray?
go ahead, yes, Doctor.
Yes, I have just one more question. And I think that's what you were alluding to Angel. So if I have volunteers on my staff and you only meet with the head coaches, is it incumbent on the head coach then to inform those specifically to what he was saying, his volunteers?
Right. No, so, well, ultimately, the first goal would be to get the head coaches trained and familiar with the system. And, then from there, we decide we need to include whoever is going to be involved in those practices as well, because they'd be attending as well. So we need to make sure that they're familiar with everything. So, but ultimately, it'd be the head coach first. That's our priority, and then we trickle down to those other coaches.
The AIA looks at, and the district looks at volunteers much differently than we look at the certified
Yes.
employees of the district. Certified teachers that are coaches already know about the professional
Right.
ethics and all of the things that are involved regarding that and knowing about policy, interaction with students and all those things. But the volunteers don't. And it's the same way with substitute teachers when they come in, that they have to give them an orientation. But he just assured us that he does do that, and whether it's the head coach certainly is the enforcer. He's the one that is the one that's going to make sure that they comply with those things. But ultimately, the athletic director, that's his
Yes.
department. He
And-
gets it done with those people.
And I agree. And every sport has, different volunteers. And I don't know, Mr. Ortega, if it's one or two. It just depends. But we have a process when people apply to be volunteers for anything. For a sport, it goes to Mr. Ortega first, as Ana Samaniego wants to volunteer for volleyball as a parent volunteer. So he reviews that along with his head coach. So that decision, he doesn't sign off on that volunteer, or we don't get it on the agenda until they give us that approval. So what I'm going to even further do is ensure that when those volunteers do come on board, because maybe they come on board mid-season, maybe they don't come on board, at the very beginning of the year, but that Angel, Mr. Ortega, has a document where he has, sat down, reviewed the guidelines, done some kind of formal training, and then there's something on file that says, I received this and on this date, as a volunteer.
Which as yesterday too,
Yes.
when each head coach received this folder, inside was an acknowledgement form that they did receive the guidelines, they understood it, they asked their questions, and it's in their hands now. So I do have that, and it would work the same with assistants when that time comes.
Okay, to recap, then, how are we going to
Okay.
leave it?
So what I would say is, your proposal is to start June 15th under Phase 1 for the, summer practices. You're recommending the continuing or opening up the weight room with the guidelines provided. So what I would say, Angel, is in the next 2 weeks, assess what supplies you do have at DHS. Then be in communication with me and Mr. Soto, because then I have the thermometers that I mentioned to you that you will be able to utilize. And then we can, look at what materials you have to start, and then we can make sure you have at least, you know, the sanitizing that you'll need on a daily basis, and then the hand washing for the kids and all of that. So I think with those things, I think we'll be okay.
But you want to keep in
Yes.
mind all of those other things.
Oh, no,
that we-
yes,
that we
because
discussed.
we're not going to just, you know, put on all our resources for the summer program. And you'll hear what I have to say about, you know, a summer program and starting of the school year with all of these things that we're discussing.
And I think he understands that.
Yes, and he does.
And also, I'm not sure if I mentioned before, not all athletic programs are starting in person
Yes.
on June 15th. It's completely optional, but they have the opportunity to do it, where some coaches have already mentioned to us that they might not even meet in person until July, until middle of July. I mean, so it's really just depends on the sport, but this June 15th window gives them the opportunity to do that following those guidelines that were provided.
Obviously, you've done a lot of work again, and you're well prepared, and what you've done is, of course, in the best interest of the district, and I know you always keep that in mind, and any decision you make, that should be uppermost. And also, Mitch, as always, we want to thank you for all the good work you do. Mitch has one of the best programs in the district. It's one of the most, not only because it's the most popular, but it's a very valuable program. The kids love it. So thank both of you guys, and we'll be in touch with you. And then, of course, you work with the administration. All right, moving right along, let's go to the
H.
item H, which is discussion action on the approval of addendum. Ms.
Okay, so
Alvarado.
before we go and approve this area, I'd like to remove, I have some items or some names to remove from that action item agenda because the PPT program is not going to take place. So we are removing Abner Cortez, Mario Romero, Richard Ross, Levi Salazar, and Alonso Tapia from this agenda item. So the discussion action approval of the following addendums would only include Hunter Long for the peak performance, the summer weight room supervisor, and Mitch Nelson for the summer trader.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to do that
I move to approve.
by Mr.
Second.
Lindeman, second by Mr. Sabal. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes,
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes,
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Perrin?
Yes. Item I, discussion action on the approval for renewal of the following sole source providers for fiscal year 2020, 2021. And those are specifically for the business department. Mr. Soto, do you have all of the documentation for that?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we do have all that. We do
Okay.
this every year, and these are basically
Yeah,
the same vendors we have. The only addition is Aptgy. But again, we have all the documentation needed for that.
Okay, so we're ready to go on that?
Mr.
All right,
What is Aptgy?
Aptgy is the company that's doing our new website that was
Oh,
approved.
okay,
Mhm.
okay.
you entertain a motion
I move to approve.
by Mr. Lindeman,
second,
second by Sabal. Roll call.
Mr. Ramos? Mr. Ramos?
yes,
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
yes,
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Perrin?
Yes. Item J, discussion action on the approval for renewal of unleaded diesel fuel multi-term contract with Border Mart, number 18-005-19 for the fiscal year 2020, 2021. Mr. Soto.
This will be the third year for Border Mart to be our unleaded and diesel provider. We did an RFP 3 years ago, but it's good for 5 years. But every year we have to bring it back just for board approval. So we didn't do any RFPs. This is just a continuation. This will be the third year.
Entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve.
Second.
I second the motion.
Second by Mr. Sabal. Any discussion, members of the board? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
yes,
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes,
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Perrin?
Yes, item K, discussion action on the approval of requests of purchase 20-004-24 for audit services. Mr. Soto.
Again, it was that time to do an RFP for audit services. All of you know, Highfield Mitch has been our auditors for so many years. So it was kind of hard for the committee to make a decision. There was 3 companies that submitted the RFP for audit services. Again, we're recommending to stay with Highfield Mitch as a renewal, basically, for
That's for
audit
the
services.
performance audit.
Correct.
All right, entertain a motion to approve
I move to approve.
by Mr. Lindeman, second
Second,
by Mr. Sabal. Any discussion, members of the board? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
yes,
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Maureen?
Yes. Item L, discussion action on the approval of the following job description. Ms. Samaniego.
As presented, these job descriptions are just some that had not been in existent, or there was a name change on the title of the job. So in order to have them in our HR files, we needed to have them board approved.
Just for clarification, are you updating them?
Yes, so we have the first one. It was a very old, like a management driver, custodian driver. So we updated that to fit the job duties of that person. No change in pay, nothing. We just updated the job description. Then the last 4 are all from New Student Center, and for some reason, and this is on previous administrations, like 2 administrations ago, when they did job descriptions, for some reason, these New Student Center were never really done. And so that's why I'm bringing them over for board approval now.
Okay, and it's more in line with the duties and
Yes.
responsibilities
Yes.
that they do?
Mhm.
All
And I
right,
worked, many, on the last 4, worked with Cesar and Mr. Fernando very closely, so.
Okay, what's that gonna, is that gonna be any change when you look at the new salary schedule for classified that we discussed?
Correct.
There's only 2, yeah,
There's only
2,
two.
and that would be the student records clerk and the registrar,
registrar.
and that's why we're bringing the new salary schedule updated to fit those 2 jobs.
Oh, very good.
Yes,
Okay.
so we're doing that.
Move to approve.
Okay, is there a second
Second,
by Mr. Sabal? Discussion, members of the board?
I have
Dr.
a
Gomez.
question. On the custodian, waste management driver, and especially now, that we're gonna be doing all the disinfecting, do you have any arrangements for medical waste?
That's something that Ms. Caruso does. I know, I don't remember the name of the company, but she makes sure that they come pick it up, everything. It's
Okay,
something that we don't pay for, so,
Yeah.
but it's something she takes care of, basically.
All right, okay.
Good question, all
Okay.
right. We have a motion on the floor?
Yes, sir.
Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
yes,
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Maureen?
Yes. Item M, discussion, report on jumpstart program and reopening the schools.
Okay.
Yeah, are you gonna get into, you wanna take about a 5-minute break, members of the
Sure.
board? Let's do
Yeah.
that. Let's take a 5-minute break.
5 minutes.
Guidelines and preparing so that we can begin school on August the 2nd or the 1st, whenever the first day of school is. And so I took input, from transportation, because our summer school kids do get transported, and with the guidelines of 1 seat, 1 child per seat, and leaving 1 seat in between empty, puts a burden on transportation. Security felt the same issue. Normally summer school takes place at some of the sites, and we combine, for example, if the site is Clawson, then Sarah Marley and Clawson students go to Clawson for their summer school. If it's at Ferris, then it would be maybe Sarah Marley and Ferris. And so for roughly, one of the middle schools has the summer school program, Douglas High School, and then a couple of the elementaries. So those schools, in a sense, if we had the summer school program, the Jumpstart, it would run from, we said July 6th through July 25th, which is that last week of July, and then the following week, school starts. And so those sites felt that because we would have kids there, they wouldn't be able to really sanitize and be ready for the start of the school year. And so overwhelmingly, the team felt that at this point, it would not be in the best interest of the kids right now to have a face-to-face instruction Jumpstart summer program, and it would not be in the best interest of the district, as we are not ready fully with all the demands under these guidelines of reopening schools. And so we shifted our conversation from having a face-to-face instruction to possibly having something online. And the principals that I had there were middle school, elementary, and even high school representation. And so elementary principals feel that online is not the best type of program, obviously, for like our first, second, and third graders. And they don't, the learning doesn't happen as it does face-to-face instruction. So online may work more for middle school and high school kids, but not the lower elementary kids. So one of the principals was not too much in favor of having online, but definitely at this point, I would say I'm going to go with the team's recommendation that DUSD is not ready to have a Jumpstart summer program as we hope to have. And I want to really reiterate this to our parents and our community, that we had every intention to be able to offer some kind of learning environment for our students to reinforce obvious learning that has been lost, reinitiate any learning that they need so that they can be ready for August. And any type of program, whether it be face-to-face or remotely hybrid, some face-to-face, some online, would be very limited in numbers. And so normally, every school has about, what would you say, Mrs. Rodriguez, 25, 30 kids that participate maybe at the elementary level or more. And then middle school kids, and Douglas High School kids, they're more for credit. And so their numbers vary too. But the way we structured it and the way we had planned it, it maybe could be tops 10 students per school. And so then you ask yourself, well, then what is the purpose, or how much is it going to help 10 kids? And how would we select the 10 kids? And so obviously it'd be based on data that the principals would provide. And normally, sometimes our summer school programs focus on the bottom 25% of the population. In this case, the team felt that because we haven't been really in school since March, they felt that targeting the bubble kids, so the medium kids, middle of the group kids, would be most beneficial in order to be able to move them forward. It'd be harder to move the lower bottom in one summer program or 1 year. And so school provides so much more than just the learning for kids. And we want to do everything that we have in our power to be able to offer face-to-face instruction. But if we were to have a summer program like this Jumpstart, it would really set us back to be able to start fully and ready to operate in August. And so definitely a face-to-face instruction is not an option right now. The other consideration too is that how overwhelmed our teachers were with this whole online teaching. And so a lot of teachers take advantage of the summer employment opportunity, and it's extra, money for them. And so the other question was, would I even have teachers that are willing to work right now, because they just, were so overwhelmed and needed a break. And we would have to get those positions board approved. So not having, the guidelines up until yesterday, does not allow us even to have something viable for a Jumpstart summer program. And I want our parents to know that, yes, we want to have something for them, but we need to consider all the facts and all the safety measures before we even bring them onto campus. So what I spoke to Mrs. Cox yesterday is in looking at possibly having something online where we would offer the same kind of instruction that was taking place during the distance learning opportunity, where we'd have teachers doing some type of online instruction to them. Then we go into the other piece of the puzzle, which is devices. And so during the distance learning, we did both. We did paper packets and we did distance learning via online for those students that had the internet capability and the device capability. So I talked to Mr. Durazo and said, okay, if we were to provide something online for them with the number of Chromebooks that we have or iPads that we have in the district, could we, let's say if we had 250 kids attending our Jumpstart, could we assign and provide those devices on a checkout basis, which they would return? And he did say, yes, we'd have, it takes some work to gather all, because all the devices are spread around throughout the schools. So we would pull them and then have to assign them as needed. That solves the device issue. It doesn't solve the internet problem, because some parents don't have internet access at home. And so then you go into the question of then how do those kids access the material if we're going to be providing the devices. So we are still looking at the possibility of doing something online, but definitely having a face-to-face summer school program such as Jumpstart at this point is not possible. We would not be able to have all the guidelines that I'm going to discuss in a moment for summer school. I don't know if you have any questions or thoughts just on summer school alone.
Why don't you, unless the board has any questions or comments, why don't you go ahead and just...
Okay. So now, speaking about reopening our schools, as I mentioned earlier, the department, the ADE and Superintendent Hoffman has released this platform, which is the roadmap for reopening schools. And the information in here is extensive. And when I spoke to Mr. Bahrain, he's like, I already read it yesterday. And I said, okay, pass me the notes. But there's a lot of information on here. And so first and foremost, this roadmap is not a book or a guide that was approved by any kind of lawmaking, body, by the legislature, by the State Board of Education. So they tell you what it is, and they tell you what it's not. So what it is, it's just guidelines. It's giving us suggestions, recommendations, and options of ways school districts can reopen schools. They do reiterate time and time that this is only suggestions and recommendations, that the decision will lay on the school board in itself and the LEA. So every district in Arizona may be different. Some may be reopened, some may go online, some will be a hybrid, just depending on the situation and current issues with COVID in their communities and what is feasible for the school districts to do. So with that being said, under the reopening schools, what I'm going to do is I will have every single administrator, from an assistant principal to a principal, every supervisor, every director, thoroughly be familiarized with this document. The document, first piece of the document is the roadmap, which is offering the leaders or the LEAs different possibilities and scenarios, which I will discuss in a minute. The other pieces of this is guidelines for teachers, guidelines for students, and guidelines for families. So obviously, under these guidelines are different factors that apply to those subgroups of individuals. I'm going to start initially with my admin team, supervisor team, director team to become familiar with this before I start bringing in other stakeholders. I will need parents involved. I will need parent input. I do plan on having some student input, probably from high school, middle school, and definitely other stakeholders from within the district in order to formulate what needs to happen here before we reopen schools. One thing is that we have to bring to you what they call a continuity operations plan. And so the acronym for that is COOP. And this continuity operations plan is just a plan that has to be approved by the board. And this plan will outline every single detail and factor that comes into play for a school closure. So what they want districts to do, because they're not saying schools aren't going to close again, they're saying there may be a possibility if there's a spike in, October come November around there, so that this plan is already approved and districts are ready to say, okay, we're closing as of Monday and this is what we're doing now. And so from distance learning to the communication to transportation, all factors included and on this plan. So obviously, work has to be put in place and work has to be done in order to bring this to you. So my goal is to bring this to you by July, so that you can all be familiar with it and approve it. And that would be our contingency plan. That's one part. The operations plan. The other part that we have to work on is the reopening plan, our strategic plan for reopening schools. And under that guideline, and Mr. Bahrain can attest, and I'm sure he'll chime in at the end, but so many guidelines that are recommended to districts. And again, they're all just recommendations, and then they say it is up to the district on what they're going to do. But first and foremost, we have, strategic planning has to be key here. And this task force, after I initially meet with my admin team, of putting not too extensive of a task force, because when you have a lot of people, then you start getting a lot of opinions. And so we need to have representation from all stakeholders in order to start strategic planning our reopening. Some questions under this guideline that they provide to you when opening. It says, based on the spring 2020 experience, are modifications to LEA policies and procedures necessary to be made? And by that, we mean board policies that we would have to bring to the board in case our reopening merits a policy change. Mr. Bahrain mentioned earlier that I think the State Board of Education is going to have to go back and kind of analyze, minutes required for student seat time for ADM that will allow LEAs to make a decision on which scenario we're going to go with, whether it be an AM, PM session and kids come for 4 hours and then leave. Another group comes for another 4 hours and leaves. So we may have to bring some policies back to the board, and one I can think of right now is the Douglas High School graduation credit requirement. So right now we have a 24 credit requirement. We may need to bring that to the board after we have our strategic plan and say, well, DHS plan is this, and we need to reconsider and bring it down to 22 in order to make things happen this year. That's just one example. What training and review before and during the school year is necessary to ensure that departments are ready to effectively implement the co-op plan that is going to be provided. So training from, checking for temperature checks, training for bus drivers and desanitizing their buses and, the different schools and departments and custodians. What training and communication are necessary to prepare students and families? So with a sudden shift to remote off-campus learning, because if you know, when we moved into school closure, we didn't have time to meet with parents or to train. It was all communication via our internet. What partnerships are necessary to implement the plan? So community organizations, health departments. What assistive technology or other accessible hardware are we going to need in order to distribute to ensure students with disabilities will have equal access? What can we do now to reduce the disparities in access to learning that will exist in the near future to the various populations, from ELD students to our ESS population and our general ed population? So there's so much I can go into detail, but what I'm going to focus on today are 3 things. Under these guidelines, there's three things that they're asking us, or several things that they're asking us to consider before a decision is made. So in the guidelines, they say, first and foremost, should you consider opening? So there's three questions initially that we have to ask ourselves. One, will reopening be consistent with applicable state and local orders? Orders may come from the governor's office, tribal nations, Department of Health Services, local health departments. So I have to answer a yes or a no. Obviously, if we were to be open, are we going to be consistent with all the guidelines? Yes, that's an easy for us to say yes. Is the school ready to protect children and employees at a higher risk for severe illness? Yes or no? 2, 3, are you able to screen students and employees upon arrival for symptoms and history of exposure? Per CDC guidelines, daily checks, screenings recommended when feasible and can include visual symptoms checks or temperature checks, verbal written confirmation from parents that students are symptom-free. Now, that's a yes or a no. So if I answer no to any of those, if there's just one no to any of those three parts, then consider not opening physical buildings in the fall. I mean, they just tell you right there. If you have one no to those three answers, then don't consider opening in the fall physically, right? The concern here is one, are we ready? So right now for summer school jumpstart, we're not ready to open up, July 6th. Are we ready to open up August, come the first of the start of the school year for physical? Right now, I can tell you we're not ready. Okay, will we be ready in July? I'm hopeful that we will. 3, are we able to screen students and employees upon arrival? That's every employee and every student when they get to school. Right now, I will say no. Okay, so that's one checklist. The next checklist says recommended health and safety actions in place. So 3 questions. The consideration is promote healthy hygiene practices such as hand washing, wearing cloth face covering as feasible. Yes or no? I think we can do that. We'll constantly hand washing with the students. Now, they do recommend wearing a cloth face covering, so it would be something like this, okay? Versus something like this, which is you can throw away after a use or a couple uses or whatever. Intensify cleaning, disinfecting, and ventilation. So what they're recommending is that, more so now that we have classrooms with open ventilation, open the window, open the door to allow that circulation of air. I think we can do that. We can intensify cleaning, we can intensify the disinfecting going on, and allow our classrooms to ventilate as much as possible. Many of our windows, I don't think, open, right, in most of our classrooms?
Right,
Yeah, so it would be the doors. Then you then you start thinking of, you have the AC going on, let's say in August, September, but then you have to open the door. So that causes then AC unit problems, right? The third consideration here is encourage physical distancing through increased spacing, small groups, and limited mixing between groups. That is key for schools, okay? What that means is a class of 30, which normally happens, it's very possible, up to 33, sometimes 35, can no longer happen. They're not recommending that take place, so it has to be smaller groups. Limited mixing between groups. So you have middle school and high school kids, what happens after they go to their first period class? They switch, right? They switched and then they mix in with second period students and then third period students. So they're recommending that we try to limit as much as possible the mixing of groups. That also affects for the ELD. ELD is changing this year, and so no longer is that 4-hour block component. But what they're recommending, the protocols for ELD are very specific, that we have a targeted group and then we have an integrated group. And so in one of those groups, no longer do they want ELD kids being segregated. They want kids to mix in with the general population. So nothing in here says, however, for ELD guidelines, you may do the opposite. It doesn't say that. So I think ADE has not come up yet with any more information on from ADE on the ELD specifications. But for ELD, kids will have to mix. Kids will have to go from one teacher to the next. But the CDC guidelines in these say limit the mixing of groups. Train all employees on health and safety protocols. I think that would be a yes. We could, make sure that training is available from health department and from us at every level for all of our schools. So that's a yes. So under those, it says any no responses, consider meeting the safeguards first. So again, no, right now, I would say mixing of groups and limiting the small class sizes for me is a no right now, today. Doesn't mean it's gonna be, can't change. So I think we need to look at what options we have to limit the number of groups coming in at one time. Then the third piece is ongoing monitoring in place. So there are about 6 questions here. 1, develop and implement procedures to check daily for signs of symptoms and students' employees upon arrival. Again, that's, I think, that checking the temperatures, making sure everybody's not sick, and that includes employees and students. Right now, I will say, I can't say that we are ready to do that, so I said no. Encourage anyone who is sick to stay home. We did it during distancing, distance learning, so that's a yes. Plan for students or employees if they get sick at school. That's a yes. We have a plan in place of contact parents, pick up your child, keep them isolated, and all of that. Communication, monitor developments with local authorities, employees, that's a yes. I'm not worried about that. Monitoring students and employee absences and have flexible leave policies and practices. What these guidelines say is that if parents choose to keep kids at home because they're concerned with COVID contact, that we should not penalize them for their absences. Now, we do have guidelines by which to meet on absences that we have to follow right now. So if there are changes, those changes are not going to come from us, but they're going to come from the state to allow some kind of leeway in those. Our leave policies are very specific, so we may have to bring some of those leave policies to meet the COVID-19 guidelines. And so right now, that's a no for me. Be ready to consult with local health authorities. Well, that's a yes. And so the guideline here is if you have any no responses, consider meeting safeguards first before you even, open up your buildings. So those are 3 factors that I just answered myself. I'm going to bring them to the group. And I'm going to have them answer for their sites and their departments as well, and then we have more information. So there's 3 scenarios that are in this handbook. Scenario 1, all students in physical buildings from the start of the school year. So that means all students go back to school. That's scenario 1. Under that scenario 1, obviously you have to meet the LEA CDC school decision tree guidelines, which I think are part of what I mentioned. There are none to minimal local and community cases of COVID-19, which takes me back to what Dr. Ed said. We'd have to get data because they're not providing those details to us. So we'd have to see, are there any cases in Douglas right now, and minimal around the community in Cochise County. Have our governing board approve our contingency plan, have a comprehensive communications plan ready, and have clearly communicated screening expectations for staff and students. And then have a plan for medically fragile staff and students as well. So that's under scenario 1. Scenario 2, some students in the physical buildings and some students distance learning wise. And so from the start of the school year. In order to do this, we have to, of course, meet the CDC guidelines. There are minimal to moderate cases in our community or around the area. Approve the contingency plan, have a comprehensive communication, screening expectations, communicated educational expectations to staff and communities, plan for fragile medical students and staff, and the distance learning should be thoughtful and take into consideration all the disability-related learning needs for our ELD kids and our SPED students, and that we consider the digital divide for students that lack connectivity or devices at home. So either we issue devices to all those that don't have one, or we figure out a way to make that happen. Because this scenario 2, picture it, one day, let's say we have half of the school come to school, while the other half is at home doing their distance learning activities. The next day, they switch. So those with doing online go to school for face-to-face, while those that were face-to-face go back to online. So obviously, this scenario has a little bit more work. And then scenario 3 is all students begin the school year distance learning. So everyone begins online with the option of returning to opening up the physical building when it's appropriate and when the school district is able and feels they're ready with all the guidelines and all the necessary commitments. That's scenario 3. And then scenario 4 is what they call intermittent distance learning throughout the school year based on emergency closures as defined by local and state health departments. So that scenario is mainly like if the governor were to say, okay, we're in September and we have to close for 2 weeks, let's say. So that would be the intermittent distance learning where we'd already be functioning as under one of those previous scenarios, but then now we have to close. And then we take guidelines from them and, okay, we're ready to reopen again. So that's what they're calling intermittent, where we open and then close, open and close throughout the year. Scenarios 3 and 4 assumes some level of universe distance learning. This is where kids would need, a device. And when an LEA has determined that one of these scenarios to be the most appropriate, then we should, again, refer to Arizona Emergency Distance Learning Guidelines, complete the Emergency Distance Learning Notification Template, which I think they provide in here, and then go on to email the completed template to ADE. So those are the 3 scenarios that we will have to carefully look at and make a decision, and then I think communicate to our families and bring back to the board. The other option is, and I mentioned this earlier, that the State Board of Education has approved for districts to apply for an online school license. Would it be a license, Mr. Murray?
Yeah,
right?
from Rio Salado.
Yes, from Rio Salado. And so right now, there are certain high schools around the state that already have an online school along with their regular school. So my idea was, okay, well, let's apply for an online school in the event that we have to go all online. There's a caveat to the online school application. The online school application will not allow you to have some kids online and some students being face-to-face. So it has to be strictly an online school. A lot of the schools that have this online is they have it as an online, not DPass, but what's that? The school
Alternative.
An alternative school. So this will allow kids to remain being counted as part of a district, but they can't perform in the regular school setting because of either their behavior or academics, so then they are allowed to still maintain enrolled in the district through an online. I was hoping that online would allow us to kind of have both, but it doesn't. So if we do apply for an online, it means that all kids will be online, strictly online. And so I sent the information to Mrs. Rodriguez, Mrs. Herrera, and Mr. Walker, because I think for that level, middle school and high school, we need to take advantage of that and see if we could get approved for an online school, which would become kind of like our alternative school that would allow our students that sometimes can't perform or that get suspended for disciplinary issues to remain as part of our district through an online school model. Because by applying for it for K-12, well, I'm not able to have some kids in school and some kids online for elementary. They won't allow me to do that through that online application. So that's something when I was reviewing it carefully last night, that's something that was very clear, that it has to be strictly online. So that's the information we have today. I know many parents are asking, what's the plan? Are we going to reopen? Are we ready to open? And at this point, these are the guidelines. DUSD has a lot of work to do in the next month and a half before we commit to to something. What I hope to do, and I think with my administrative team, is we hope to be able to do scenario 2, which is some students in the physical building and some students distance learning. Because scenario 1 is all students in the physical building. And I don't think that's possible with the guidelines that they provided. So CDC guidelines, just to give you some idea. Number 1 is no switching of classes. 2 is limit the number of students in a classroom. Desk must face one direction. So normally you have teachers put 4 desks together to kind of make a little table, and you have 4 kids facing each other. The guidelines say don't do that anymore. So the desks have to be facing one direction. Desks have to be at least 6 feet apart. So how do you put 30 kids in a classroom with a desk 6 feet apart and only facing one direction? That's a challenge. As far as community spaces such as cafeterias, gymnasiums, playground areas, they are saying with cafeteria, students should not eat in the cafeteria anymore, but lunches should be delivered to the classroom so that they eat at their desk individually with very specific guidelines on like sealed containers in order to deliver food or stack lunches. Playground, recess times, that's going to be a challenge because they're saying limit the number of kids that are out in the playground all at one time. So for example, lunch recess, well, if you have one lunch, you have all those kids eating in the cafeteria and then going out to lunch together. So that's going to be some adjustment that we're going to have to do. Staggering the beginning of the day, and so as kids are coming in, they're saying if you can, then stagger the times of the students that are coming in so that you don't have everybody start at 8 o'clock in the morning, for example. Same thing for dismissal. Stagger the dismissal and set different areas within the campuses so that parents pick them up at different areas. The biggest, I think, concern, along with the no more than certain kids in a classroom, is transportation for me. Transportation guidelines are very, very specific and make it really tough. They're saying 1 child per seat and leaving an empty space in between those that are being occupied. So normally we have, 52 kids fit in a bus normally, right? So if we have 1 child per seat, that's 20 kids maybe that we could transport around there. That creates, do we go with more route schedules? Some kids already get picked up if they live in the outskirt areas. They're getting picked up at 6 o'clock, 6:15 in the morning sometimes, and that's for 1 bus route. So to me, that poses some problems. Now, everything in here does not say you have to do it. If it is permitted and if it is within reason and within the means of your school district and your community, then go ahead and do this. If not, for example, the bus situation, I don't think we can run. We don't have the manpower, the number of buses to be able to say, okay, for 1 pickup location, we're going to have 3 buses go out to that location to pick up, let's say, the 75 kids in that area. I don't think we have that capacity of buses. So what they're saying, if you can't abide by these guidelines because of the logistics of your district, then ensure that everyone has a mask. Maybe you even have bus drivers doing temperature checks. So they're allowing you to have some other measures in case you can't put just 1 kid in every seat and 1 space in between spaces. So I'm thinking, okay, let's say we can't leave a space. We can go ahead and do 1 child per seat, but in every seat, and every child will have to have a mask. The other things that they're saying is with bathrooms, if our sinks are not spread out like 6 feet apart, to have that plexiglass, what they're calling sneezing, coughing guards or whatever. Some of our front offices don't have kind of that open space, like RBMS is open, Stevenson office, Ferris office, and Sarah Marley. So I've talked to Cesar because those offices are going to have some kind of a plexiglass protective, for the secretaries. But some of the guidelines are talking about the bathrooms too for staff and for students. I've been following it carefully, I've done webinars of other, Canada, I did a webinar of Canada schools that reopened, Korea schools, and, a bunch of them, and you see classrooms with the desk having that plexiglass around. None of this, and I don't think, Ms. Braden, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of these guidelines say that the desks have to have that covering, but we do have to have, tissue provided and make sure that there's hand washing, that our schools have posters with all these, recommendations and reminders of parents. Hallways have to be marked a certain way to, arrows pointing in one direction so that students know to walk a certain way. If you're gonna, let's say, line up, you should have, labels like 6 feet apart so that kids line up 6 feet apart. So there's a lot. And I know I shared a lot of information. And so I have a meeting with my whole administrative supervisor director team on, when, Alma? Thursday?
Thursday.
And we're going to start tackling this. And obviously, this is work that I can't do by myself because I need input, and I need input from all avenues and all stakeholders. So they're going to help me, and we're going to divvy this manual up between leaders, teachers, and students and families, because everyone is going to be impacted. And we know in order to reopen, it's going to cost money. It's going to cost a lot of money. And so I'm hoping that through this funding that we're going to receive, it'll allow us to be able to do some of these things that we need to do that normally we would have never thought of. And so it's a challenge. It's a very difficult challenge, very stressful. I know it's causing a lot of stress on my admin team, on me, on parents, and nobody has a perfect answer. Nobody has this and say, oh, this is how you're going to do it at DUSD. You have to figure out on your own based on these guidelines and that meet what Douglas's situation is. We are a border town. I am very concerned that once the border opens up, that we're going to have more cases in the area. So it's a lot to consider. And we need kids back in our schools because schools provide so much more than the learning. I was watching on the news that there's been a spike in kids calling the hotlines of, those kids that are being abused at home because they're at home with those parents and please get me out of here. So that's a concern. Domestic violence issues with parents being at home, and we need to be able to provide instruction to our kids because this is their social, emotional well-being. This is where they, socialize with their peers, with their teachers, and so it's so much more than learning math and reading. And kids need to be in school, and we're going to do everything that we can in order to provide the best scenario under the circumstances that we are dealing with.
Okay, you did a tremendous job of giving the board an overview, and there's a lot of information there. It's very complex, and it's going to be very difficult to deal with. The bottom line is, and I think I speak on behalf of the board, is that as long as you do what's within the parameters of state and federal guidelines, and you follow those guidelines, and of course you can even use your own, you can be imaginative and come back with whatever you think fits locally our purposes. But what I would suggest is that you figure out what phase, what components, what parts of that you want to take. Meet with your admin team, you've said that over and over, and I know you're doing it, and come back to the board with a very specific plan. The other thing is, I don't think that we need to ask any questions or comments today, because we don't know what direction we're going to go in. So let them come back, and the overview was good because the board knows and the community needs to know what the district and especially the administration's confronted with, and it's going to be a formidable task. What I would suggest is that, and we said it earlier during the presentation on the AIA, that money that you're going to get from CARE, you should be very, very careful on the expenditure of that money, and not to minimize the presentation that was made by the athletic director and regarding athletics. You want to make sure that the money that you spend, any expenses related to anything you do that's not specifically curricular driven, that you monitor that very, very carefully, because I read that whole thing, and even if you take just parts of it, but board members, the thing that we have to be cognizant of is we're looking at some logistics that are going to be almost impossible for us to do here, and we're looking at limited funds, and the dynamics that are going to be involved here that she's going to have to reckon with is what happens at the state and the federal level, what happens with the auditors, what happens with the legislature and what they say. All of these things are going to have to come together, so it's a little premature now. The information was great so that the board and the public knows what we're dealing with now, but you come back with all of those things in mind, and you have to be especially cognizant and sensitive to the finances, especially sensitive to the finances. And I'm not suggesting that you do it, but any positions that you have that are vacant, any expenditures that are not absolutely necessary, everything should be centered on curriculum and transportation and anything that has to do with getting those kids to and from school. The sanitizing aspect of it, it could break you.
Yes.
So.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, Mr. Brain, I wrote in, my notes as Alma asked me this morning, how are you? I said, well, I didn't get any sleep, but that's okay. It's part of the job, right? But even in one of the sections, it talks about designating a person at every site to be they even called it, so I wrote a note to myself, it's kind of like creating a position.
Right.
It's not your health aide, because the health aides are one person. Compliance, but
That's
it's
why
a
I mentioned
person.
compliance,
A
that,
person
Angel.
that will be the temperature checker or the, evaluator at the start of your gate or the opening of your office or wherever it is. So when in looking at that, I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna need, I need this one person, let's say, if I were to create that position at every school, that's 8 schools. And I will say that I am looking at every position that I have vacant right now, and I have some decisions to make, and I've talked to Mr. Soto extensively, and as now Mr. Nunez has left, and I may take on a lot of those responsibilities myself this year because of the situation we're in. I don't know how our enrollment will truly look like in the fall, and that's a concern. Here, they mentioned it over and over, that is a concern of ADE and the State Board of Education, and I hope it's a concern of the legislature too, that how would schools be able to operate if we lose all that funding because of our ADM? And it makes it very challenging. And so I have some decisions to make, but I'm willing to work harder than I ever have, and that's my job, and that's my role, to lead this district, and taking on some of added responsibilities, because right now, my main focus, my priority is reopening and focusing our curriculum with all of these guidelines.
Right.
I can do HR. I can manage and with the people, the leadership that I have at this district, and get assistance from there. But I need to be very conservative, and I plan to do that.
Well, and I don't, you've really got your work cut out for you, but I don't want to overemphasize, board members, that with the state, with the finances and the ability for the state to be able to collect taxes, you have to remember they're tax driven as well, and with the economy the way it is in the state, with all these businesses shut down, they're going to have as well as the county is going to have a very difficult time collecting taxes. And so if these taxes aren't paid, then the legislature's going to have to look at rainy day funds and all of those things. That's why I mentioned earlier that all of the dynamics of everybody's going to have to come together, because it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be a task. So let me again suggest that, again, Anna, that was great information, that you come back at a special meeting whenever you crystallize something and you're able to tell the board specifically, knowing what you know, and let some of the things kind of unfold at the state level so that you know what's going to be happening up there as well. All right, so I don't want to cut the board off, but the board, if you have comments or questions.
Well, I
go
just
ahead.
said one thing. In dental offices, we used to have what we called an infection control person. And so that's what they're asking you to
Yeah,
have.
that would be entitled, yeah. Yeah, and that's why I was concerned about who was going to do
Yeah.
that with, with these guys in those athletic, with the training rooms and with all of the, the body,
contact,
all this stuff. I don't know. You're going to have to monitor all that stuff very, very carefully. All right, so Anna, thank you
Okay.
very much. That was great. You did your homework.
Did my
I'm sure
homework.
you stayed up
Yes,
late
I
doing that. So that brings us then to the agreement on the approval of the dual enrollment intergovernmental agreement with Cochise College, and I'll let you do that one.
Yes. And so this is just a routine, and we do it every year, and this is to allow that dual enrollment for Douglas High School students. So it's just a regular IGA.
I'll entertain a motion to approve
I move to approve.
by Mr. Lindeman. Second,
Oh, ya se fue. I second.
Dr. Gomez. Ya se fue made the second. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes,
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Berrain?
Yes. Item O, discussion action on the approval of a 2020-2021 schedule for Rayburn Middle School. Ms. Samaniego.
Okay. So before I turn it over to Mrs. Rodriguez, she had spoken to me earlier on during the year about potentially doing a schedule change in order to accommodate the needs of our BMS, specifically the many kids that are ELD at Rayburn, and you've heard that presentation earlier on in the year, and also the number of kids that would need a second RTI class. And RTI is an intervention class based on school data, benchmark data, CFA data, and for kids that are not mastering the standards. And so if you recall, last year you approved a schedule change for Huber Middle School because they had really high numbers in some of their classes, so they added an 8th period and reduced their period minutes to like 51 minutes or so. So you did that. What Mrs. Rodriguez is proposing is a revised RBMS schedule, which will allow her to have a second mandatory RTI class for the students that obviously would be selected by them and communicated with parents. It would be part of the regular schedule. Now, in lieu of the circumstances right now, I told her, Melissa, go ahead and bring it to the board, get it approved in the event that you're able to have a regular school day at one point during the year. So by you approving this schedule will allow her to have that as a plan that may not end up working out if we have to go like to double sessions or to A/B or B day or distance learning, whatever. But I wanted her to bring it to you so that you could approve it hopefully with what information she has to provide.
Good to see you, Melissa. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
What were you
Good
saying?
afternoon now. Mr.
Wait,
Berrain,
that brings up
members
a
of the
very good
board.
point. Is the pizza going to be ready?
It's not-
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it
Melissa,
is
you go ahead.
lunchtime. So, yes, I was kind of hesitant to present this just because of the circumstances. We don't know what the new norm is going to be. But, just being optimistic that one day we'll be back to normal. There are some things, I mean, first and foremost, doing what's best for students. And, you know, it's my job as a building principal to find ways to meet the needs of kids and provide opportunities to continually increase our student achievement at Rayburn Middle School. So I'm going to go ahead and explain to you the purpose of why we are implementing a second RTI class. So technically, yes, we are implementing an 8-period day, which will increase our school day by 15 minutes, but just keep in mind that it's not for everyone, okay? So we'll be extending the school day to provide an additional RTI class at the end of the school day, which will be mandatory for at-risk students based on academic performance. So Mrs. Samaniego kind of explained that. This would be a selective group of students. So currently, we have an RTI class. It's a 30-minute class that is required for all students. So we've structured that class in many different ways. We've leveled our students based on academic ability. We've mixed them. We've done mixed ability grouping. We've tried different ways. We go based off of our benchmark scores, our AZ merit scores, CFA data. So we've done the grouping of our regular RTI class in many ways. But the biggest challenge that we face in that class is the large class sizes, because there has to be a place for us to place all of our students. So we've always kind of played around with the idea of what we could do with that RTI class. We've talked about moving that RTI class to the end of the day, but due to some scheduling conflicts, especially around our lunch periods and things like that, it wasn't feasible. So as we brought this to our leadership team, and Dr. Egan actually first came up with the idea, he said, well, why don't we, first of all, he said, why don't we move the RTI to the end of the day? So I explained to him, you know, we've thought about that, but due to scheduling, it was not, we were unable to do it. So then as I thought about it, we're like, well, let's just create a second RTI class. And we would limit the number of kids that would be able to be in that class and really target those high-need students. So anyways, that's how we came up with this proposal. So if you want to go ahead, our BAL schedule. So now our day would be extended 15 minutes. So our school day in the normal world would be from 8 a.m. to 3:15 versus 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. You guys should have received the background info.
You got it
like
on the
this.
monitor, too.
Yeah. So it would be an 8-period schedule. The core class minutes would be reduced from 57 minutes to 55 minutes, so we're only losing 2 minutes from the regular period. And the school day would be extended for at-risk students until 3:15. All other students that are not required to have the second RTI, their dismissal time would be at 2:43. That would be the end of their school day. So after 7th period, their day would be over. And we're talking about, we want to keep the group small. So we're looking at possibly about 200 students that would be staying for the second RTI class. And that would give us around 10 students per teacher. So creating a smaller group environment. So regular class sizes would not be affected in reducing the number of periods. So unlike the schedule that Huber presented, theirs was to reduce class sizes. This is solely for the purpose of giving our kids additional intervention time. So the one exception that we would have, that on Thursdays, early release days, we would not have the second RTI class just because it is already a shortened day.
So the early release days are not every day, they're just the days that you have training.
Yes, on the Thursdays. So that one would be the regular 7-period shortened period schedule. So if you can see there, the bell schedules are listed. And on the left side, you have the regular release time with the addition of the 8th period class. And then on the right side, you have the early release schedule with the school day ending after 7th period. Okay, so just to reiterate, this is not tutoring. I know a lot of times parents are going to be like, well, I want my kid to stay because they need help. No, this is going to be a scheduled class in the student's schedule, particularly for those targeted students. So if parents want tutoring, then those kids would have to wait until 3:15 when the school day is over. They can't just opt to stay during that 30-minute class period. So like I said before, it is mandatory for at-risk students, so that was the biggest thing. And working with Manny and discussing with her, I said, is there a way that we can add this period but not have our entire student population scheduled? And she said yes, because minutes-wise we would be okay. And if we left it optional, that's where we run into a problem. The kids do not stay. So we felt if we made it mandatory and created it as part of their regular school day in a scheduled class where they would be earning credit or a pass-fail grade, then they would have to stay. Okay, so our focus would be to focus on fundamental skills in math and reading. So those essential skills that the students need to be successful in their regular core classes. It's unfortunate we do still have a lot of kids that are struggling readers that come into middle school or that have very, very low math skills. So we would hope that this second RTI class would be able to zone in on those skills so the students would be more successful during their regular school day. So this is kind of just a little how the procedures would look like. So first and foremost, we would identify at-risk students based on grades, their assessment data, and teacher recommendation. We would also be creating pre- and post-tests that we would administer during this class time to determine whether adequate growth of performance happened within that one quarter. So this would be every quarter. We would assess and determine whether the kids would continue in that second RTI or would have moved out. So they have that kind of we dangle that carrot that they're able, if they show enough growth, then maybe second quarter they won't need the second class, so they'll be able to move out. And on the same note, if students are not performing where they have, and we notice that they've regressed, then just because they didn't have the second RTI the first quarter, there's a possibility they could have it the second quarter. So we would be monitoring student progress every quarter. So we've talked that our math teachers and ELA teachers, along with our instructional coach, would help develop a curriculum and pacing calendar using resources that we already have in the district, so it wouldn't be something that we would have to buy. For example, currently we use Study Island, which has been a godsend, especially with our online platform. We have ExactPath. I have My Access listed on here, but now with the adoption of the new ELA curriculum, we'll have something similar already with Pearson. We have Engage New York, and then any other resources we have in the district. So the teachers that would be teaching the second RTI would be our core teachers. That would be our math teachers, our reading teacher, our writing teacher, our science teacher, and our social studies teachers. So our elective teachers would not be part of this second RTI. And once we get to the master schedule, I'll kind of explain why. So like I said, the next quarter, a new group of students would be enrolled into the RTI-2 based on the same criteria, grades, assessment data, and teacher recommendation. Some students from the previous quarter could continue to be enrolled if adequate progress was not made. So this process was continue quarter to quarter. So I know a big question is like, well, what about our ESS or our ELL students? You know, how do they fall into this category? So they would also be included. If they, based on the criteria that we mentioned before, if they fall under that criteria of being at risk, these students may also be enrolled in that RTI-2 class. So for example, for our ESS students, if the ESS teacher may be their RTI-2 teacher, if they feel that based on their IEP goals, additional service minutes will be required, that would be a time that they can provide those additional service minutes. But if not, if the service minutes have been met, then these students could be placed in a general ed classroom. The same thing goes with our ELL students. If they're in need and they would benefit from having the second RTI class, they would be included in these classes as well. So the last page here I have is our tentative master schedule for the upcoming school year. Of course, you know, based on the entire conversation we've had today regarding the reopening of schools, there might be huge modifications made to this master schedule. But just very quickly, so before our master schedule ended after 7th period. So if you notice in that turquoise color box at the end there, that would be where the RTI-2 class would be added. So currently our elective teachers, their planned period is during the first RTI class, which is only a 30-minute class. So in comparison to the other teachers, their planned period is shorter than our core teachers. So at this time, I do have that planned period again for the RTI-2, and that would give them the full hour as our other teachers have in terms of planning. But just maybe based on the needs of the kids, they are also aware that if needed, they might have to also pick up an RTI class. But at this point, I don't think that we would need those teachers to be part of it. Plus, they'd have a much larger job. Since we are dismissing at 2:43, those are the teachers that I would have to rely on to provide the supervision for the first dismissal time. Any questions?
Members of the board, any questions? Mr.
I had a couple of comments. Yeah, thank you. This really sounds good, and I want to do everything we can to raise the students' scores and stuff. I like the idea of it mandatory, and then I like the incentive, because as I think we know, the children, they're not going to work hard unless there's something valuable that they're going to gain. And getting out of class is always valuable, I thought. So, but my other question was, is 30 minutes going to truly be enough time?
So remember, they're getting 30 minutes in the RTI-1. So then the RTI-2, they're getting an additional 30 minutes. So really, it's an hour of intervention that they'll be receiving daily. Don't forget, we still have after-school tutoring that's available. So those students aren't going to be shooed away and say, okay, you're done. They'll be able to stay if they want to. But the requirement will be that they'll have to stay until 3:15. If they choose to stay longer than that, then that'll depend on them and actually, more importantly, their parents.
Everyone else has left the call.
And then my other question was, how is this going to affect the bus students? You know, some staying later and some not. And
I think she had that discussion with the transportation supervisor somehow.
He'll make it work.
Hey, he's going to do it. He's going to do it.
He'll do it.
Oh, that's right.
Let me, just quickly, Melissa.
Yes.
I know you involved staff. Were they enthusiastic about it? Did they like it?
Yes, so that was my first big concern. You know, I don't want to put more on a teacher's plate than they already have. But I know one of their biggest complaints is that kids don't stay for tutoring. That's the one big concern they have. So when I proposed this, I said, you know what, you need to be real with me, you need to be honest, because if you're not on board with it, then I'm not going to go through with it. I'm not going to present it to the board. And they all felt strongly, because now, as much as they want kids to stay, now they're actually going to have those kids stay, because normally these kids probably are not the ones that would stay after school for tutoring. You know, unfortunately, the kids that probably don't need it are the ones that come after school and ask for additional help. So making this mandatory, the teachers were really on board with it, because that was the first thing I said. If you guys are not on board, then I'm not going to propose a second class, because it puts more on their plate. It's an additional class they have to plan for daily.
Good. I hope things get back to normal so that you can implement it.
And I think the other factor, Mr. Lindeman, is the oversight on the administration part, because if they're committing to having the second RTI class, RBMS teachers need to understand this is not a tutoring period or a homework period, because then that defeats the purpose of having a second RTI. What Melissa's guidance will be is that this needs to be direct instruction pertaining to a standard or deficiencies that those students have, because if it becomes a homework club, then it defeats her goal. And I think that's going to be on them, on their supervision, and making sure that during that last period of the day for those students that the teachers are complying to her request.
I'm glad you said that, because a lot of
Yes.
times in these types of situations, teachers think that it's a time to let them also just come in and get your
Yes,
homework done. And so anyway, well, that's great. Members of the board, Mr. Dr.
And
Gold.
I think I finally got it. So the same students that go to RT1 are the ones that go to RT2.
So
Some of them.
all students, say 430 is what we had this year, all students have RTI 1.
Oh, they all do?
So the RTI 2 would only be for half of those students,
Okay.
For those that need it.
for those that need it.
Okay, great. Anything else? Thanks a lot, Melissa.
right.
Did you get your doors fixed?
They're coming.
There's-
They're on the way? What about the awning? For the
It's also coming, we already got the
And the
second
AC
quote.
units?
The
Very
SUVs
good. Thanks a
already
lot,
got.
Melissa.
All right,
Really
thank you.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. I'll entertain a motion to approve
I move to approve.
by Mr. Lindeman.
I second.
Second by Dr. Gomez. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
He's gone.
I think that's
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Burring?
Yes. Item P, discussion action on the approval of revised Douglas Unified School District classified salary schedule. Ms.
Yes, and so as presented, as I mentioned, because we brought some positions, job descriptions, then I just added them and revised them to suffice those changes. So that's it.
Okay, good.
Move to approve.
By Mr. Lindeman, second.
Second.
By Dr. Gomez. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Burring?
Yes, item 4, discussion items, future agenda items. Members of the board, the only thing I can think of is that once she gets established on and focused on what she wants to do, you're going to call a special board
Yes.
meeting, right? Okay, unless members of the board had any future agenda items. Announcements?
None. We are, as far as return to work for DUSD, we are on phase 1, right? Yes, this is our second week of phase 1. And I always also advise them that we would I would be receiving information, and in case I needed to change things around. So right now, our employees here, like at district office, so that there's not the whole group working all at once, we're doing 4-hour shifts. And so some are coming in the morning, some are coming in the afternoon, and if we need to cross paths, and then we do. And so I will be revising that or analyzing that at the end of the week, just because I got that information that there's a spike in Cochise County, and we'll see if I need to make changes on that. Other than that, our offices are open to the public from 10 to 2 right now.
Okay, and then we have the Independence Day and then public hearing on the budget adoption, July the 7th. And then the next board meeting is July the 7th. And then when we have the public hearing, of course, that's a completely separate announcement.
Yes.
And you guys understand that great now. So the governing board may vote to go into executive session pursuant to ARS 38-431.03, subsection A1 for the following matters. A, consideration on recommendation of termination with cause of employment for classified employee A, we'll say, and B, consideration on recommendation of termination with cause of employment for classified employee B, and superintendent's performance pay set out pursuant to ARS 15-31, subsection A, number 39 for Superintendent C. Entertain a motion to do that
I move to go into executive session.
by Mr. Lindeman. Second, Doctor?
Yes, I'll second, but I just want to ask a question or discussion.
Okay, go ahead.
Are these people here?
One is.
One is.
One is, in
Oh,
case
okay.
you,
All right,
were to
then-
call
then
them.
Yes.
Okay.
That's fine.
And by the way, did any one of those ask for an open session?
No.
Okay. Roll call.
I need a second, Dr. Gomez. Okay. Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bereen?
Yes, and Mr. Ramos has the advantage, he's probably having lunch while he's.
Yes.
The rest of us are hungry.
Oh.
Okay, we're back in open session, and we're under item 6A, consideration on recommendation of termination with cause of employment for classified employee Claudia Margayan. Members of the board, on
I
the
move-
recommendation, how do you find?
I move to approve the recommendation of termination for the classified employee by the administration and non-rehirable.
Not rehirables. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dr. Gomez. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bereen?
Yes. Item B, consideration on recommendation to termination with cause of employment for classified employee Ruben Vasquez. Regarding the recommendation of the administration, what's your feeling?
I move to approve the recommendation of termination with cause of employment for a classified worker and non-rehirable.
Is there a second by Dr.
Second.
Gomez? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bereen?
Yes. Item C, superintendent's performance pay set out pursuant to ARS 15-341A, subsection 39, for the employment goals in the amount of $6,020, which is already included in the contract for Mrs. Samaniego. Mr. Lindemann?
I move to approve.
Second.
Second by Dr. Gomez. That reflects 5% of the contract, which is already, the total amount is already, it's already included in the total amount. Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bereen?
Yes. Nobody